Tiana stood in the center of her living room, surrounded by gold balloons that spelled out Happy 40th Birthday, when her husband walked through the front door with a woman she'd never seen before and two children holding her hand. The music didn't stop, but every conversation did. James smiled like a man who had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. Confident, proud, cruel. "Everyone," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "I want you to meet my real family." The woman beside him, younger, composed, eyes scanning the room like she owned it, stepped forward. "I'm Kiara," she said, "and these are James's children, the family he's been building for the past 15 years. Tiana felt every pair of eyes in the room shift to her face, waiting for her to crumble, waiting for tears, waiting for the breakdown. James had been counting on, but Tiana didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She reached into her purse, pulled out a crisp white envelope, and handed it to James without saying a single word. His smile flickered. "What is this?" he asked, his voice quieter now, uncertain. Tiana's voice was calm, steady, cold as steel. "Open it." James tore the envelope open, and the moment he read the first line, his face went pale. "Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, and trust me, you need to hear every word, I need you to do something. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart, if you've ever been underestimated, humiliated, or written off, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself when everyone thought you were finished, then hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel, Becoming Her, is where we tell the stories that matter, and also comment on where you are watching from. I would like to see how far this story travels. The stories of women who didn't just survive, they rose, they reclaimed their power, and they walked away free. Tiana's story? This one will stay with you long after it's over. Now let's go back to that party. Let's go back to the moment James realized he had made the worst mistake of his life. But to understand what happened that night, you need to know who Tiana was before James tried to destroy her. You need to know what she built, what she sacrificed, and what she discovered when she finally stopped trusting the man who promised to protect her. Tiana Holloway had spent the entire day preparing for this moment, not just the party, the milestone, 40. It wasn't a number that frightened her. It was a number that represented survival. Proof that she had made it through the hard years and come out whole. The house looked perfect. Warm string lights hung across the living room. A playlist of old-school R&B hummed softly in the background. The dining table overflowed with food her mother and sisters had spent the afternoon preparing. Mac and cheese, fried chicken, greens, sweet potato pie. It smelled like home. It felt like love. Tiana moved through the space with practiced grace, greeting guests as they arrived. Cousins she hadn't seen in months. Friends from college who'd flown in to celebrate. Co-workers who admired her from a distance and finally had an excuse to get close. They all said the same things. "You don't look 40. Girl, you're glowing. What's your secret?" Tiana smiled and thanked them, but she didn't tell them the truth. The truth was that 40 felt heavier than she expected, not because of age. Age had never scared her, but because of everything she didn't have yet. She had built a company worth $3 million, a consulting firm that started as an idea in a notebook and grew into something people whispered about at industry events. Something that made other women lean in and ask, "How did you do it?" Tiana never told them the full story, that it took sacrifice, that it took nights she didn't sleep and mornings she forgot to eat, that it took every ounce of discipline she had to build something that couldn't be taken from her, or so she thought. She had success, she had financial security, she had a house that felt like sanctuary, but there was one thing missing: children. Tiana felt it most acutely when her nieces and nephews arrived. 3 of them, ages 4, 6, and 8, bursting through the front door with balloons and noise and unbridled energy. They hugged her legs, shouted, "Happy birthday, Auntie!" and ran off before she could respond. Tiana watched them disappear into the backyard, their laughter echoing through the house, and felt that familiar ache settle in her chest. She had always wanted to be a mother, not as a checkbox, not as an obligation, as a calling. She had tried. She had waited. She had sat in doctors' offices with James beside her, listening to words like challenging and age-related and not impossible, but we need to be realistic. Nothing final, nothing hopeless, just enough uncertainty to make every birthday feel like a countdown. Still, she had James, or so she believed. For 15 years, James Holloway had been the picture of devotion, attentive, present, proud. He showed up to her business events with flowers. He told her she was brilliant in front of his colleagues. He held her at night like a man who had nothing to hide. He told her she was enough. And Tiana believed him because love, she thought, was built on trust, and trust was something you earned over time. What Tiana didn't know for most of those 15 years was that James had been living a second life, a life with Kiara, his childhood sweetheart, the woman who had known him before ambition, before responsibility, before marriage, the woman who had never let him go. For 15 years, James had been splitting himself in half. One half belonged to Tiana, the wife who built empires. The other half belonged to Kiara, the woman who made him feel like he didn't have to. The affair never stopped, it simply adapted. Hidden in business trips, late nights, deleted text messages, excuses that sounded reasonable enough to avoid suspicion. To Tiana, James remained loving. To Kiara, he promised legacy. And tonight, on Tiana's 40th birthday, James had decided it was time to stop pretending. The party was in full swing when Tiana excused herself to the kitchen. She needed a moment, just one. Away from the noise and the laughter and the weight of everyone's expectations. She leaned against the counter, her hands gripping the cool marble, and closed her eyes. Through the doorway, she could hear her youngest niece squealing as someone lifted her into the air. She could hear her sister laughing. She could hear James's voice, smooth, charming, telling some story that had the room captivated. He was good at that, making people believe. Tiana opened her eyes and looked down at her hands. Her wedding ring caught the light. A simple band, elegant, timeless. She twisted it slowly, the way she always did when her mind wandered to places she didn't want it to go. Children. The word lived in her chest like something unfinished. She had dreamed about them her whole life, not in the abstract way some people did, where motherhood was a vague idea floating somewhere in the future, but in vivid, specific detail. She imagined bedtime stories, school plays, scraped knees and band-aids, the weight of a small hand in hers. She had tried. She and James had tried for years. At first it felt natural, expected, just another step in the progression of marriage. But months turned into years, and the trying became clinical. Temperature checks, ovulation calendars, doctor's appointments that left her feeling exposed and fragile. The doctors were kind, professional, but their words always carried the same undertone. Your age is a factor. We're not saying it's impossible. Let's give it more time. Time. That was the one thing Tiana felt slipping away. She had poured herself into her business because it was something she could control, something she could build with her own hands, something that wouldn't reject her. But late at night, when James was asleep beside her and the house was quiet, Tiana would lie awake and wonder if she'd made the wrong trade. Success for motherhood, empire for family. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, a text from her sister. "Where you at? Come back out here. People are asking for you." Tiana took a breath, smoothed her dress, and walked back into the living room. James was standing near the fireplace, holding a glass of wine, surrounded by a small crowd. He looked good, confident, like a man who had everything figured out. When he saw her, he smiled. "There she is," he said warmly, "the birthday girl." Everyone turned to look at her. Tiana smiled back and raised her glass. "Thank you all for being here," she said. "This means more to me than you know." Applause. Cheers. Someone started singing Happy Birthday, and the room joined in. Tiana stood there, surrounded by love, and felt completely alone, because the one person who was supposed to see her, really see her, was the one person who had stopped looking years ago. But what Tiana didn't know yet was that James wasn't just distant. He was planning. And tonight, he believed, would be the night he finally won. What Tiana didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that James had been lying to her since the beginning. Not about small things, not about finances or work or where he'd been on a Tuesday afternoon. About everything. About who he was, what he wanted, who he loved. James had always been good at compartmentalizing. It was a skill he'd learned young. Growing up in a house where love was conditional and approval was earned through performance, James learned to become whoever the room needed him to be. To his parents, he was the dutiful son. To his friends, he was the life of the party. To Tiana, he was the supportive husband. And to Kiera, he was the man he actually wanted to be. Kiera had been in his life longer than anyone. They grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same high school, lost their virginity to each other in the back of his mother's car the summer before college. She was his first everything, and when James left for college and met Tiana, brilliant, ambitious, focused, he told himself Kiera was just a phase, a memory, something he'd outgrow, but he never did. He kept in touch, casual at first, a text here and there, a phone call on her birthday, innocent enough to justify. But over time, the texts became longer, the calls became more frequent, and when Tiana started traveling for work, James started seeing Kiera again, not as a fling, as a relationship. He told himself it wasn't wrong, that he could love two women in different ways, that Tiana got the version of him that was ambitious and responsible, and Kiara got the version that was free. He balanced both lives with precision. Business trips became excuses. Late nights at the office became cover stories. He maintained separate phone numbers, separate email accounts, separate versions of himself that never overlapped. To Tiana, he was present, loving, supportive. To Kiara, he was hers. And for 15 years, James believed he had it all figured out. He had the wife who made him look successful, and he had the woman who made him feel loved. But the performance took effort, more effort than James ever let on. There were nights when he would sit in his car outside Kiara's apartment building, phone in hand, staring at Tiana's name in his contacts. He would rehearse what he'd say if she ever found out, how he'd explain, how he'd frame it. He told himself he loved Tiana, in his own way. She was brilliant, driven, the kind of woman other men envied him for having, but she was also exhausting. Tiana demanded honesty. She asked questions. She noticed when his stories didn't line up. She paid attention in ways that made James feel exposed. Kiara never questioned him. Kiara accepted him, laughed at his jokes, made him feel like he didn't have to prove anything. With Kiara, James could be lazy, comfortable, himself. And when Kiara told him she was pregnant the first time, James felt something he hadn't expected. Pride. Not guilt, not fear. Pride. He was going to be a father. He never questioned how it happened, never asked the questions a more careful man would have asked, never thought to check the timeline against his own medical history, because he wanted to believe, and Kiara let him. When Zaria was born, James was there. He held her in the delivery room, counted her fingers and toes, whispered promises to her while Kiara slept. He told himself he would be there for this child, even if he couldn't be there publicly, even if he had to split his life in half, he would be a father. And when Rashawn was born 4 years later, James felt the same swell of emotion, the same certainty. These were his children, his legacy, the proof that he was more than Tiana's husband, more than the man who supported her empire. He was a father, and that identity became the thing he held on to when the guilt crept in late at night. But what James didn't know, what he had buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed, was that fatherhood was a lie Kiera had built for him, a lie she maintained with careful precision. Because Kiera knew the truth. She had always known. James couldn't father children, and the children she raised, they belonged to someone else entirely. Everything shifted the day James asked Tiana to sign over the company. It happened 6 months before her 40th birthday. They were sitting at the kitchen table, finishing dinner, when James brought it up casually. Too casually. "I've been thinking," he said, setting down his fork, "about the business." Tiana looked up. "What about it?" "I think we should transfer ownership. Put it in my name." Tiana's hand stilled on her wine glass. "Why?" "Protection," James said smoothly. "Tax efficiency. If something happens to you, the transfer process will be easier. It's just smart planning, babe." Tiana stared at him. She had built that company from nothing. Every client, every contract, every dollar. It was hers in a way few things in her life had ever been, and James knew that. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I'm not asking you to give it up," James said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I'm asking you to protect it, protect us." Tiana wanted to believe him. She had always wanted to believe him. "Let me think about it," she said. James smiled. "Of course, take your time." But over the next few weeks, he didn't let it go. He brought it up again and again, always gently, always framed as love, as partnership, as protection. And slowly, Tiana's resistance wore down. Because she trusted him. Because 15 years of marriage had taught her that James had her best interests at heart. So she signed. And the moment the ink dried, everything changed. It wasn't immediate. It was subtle. James became less patient. His words had sharper edges. Jokes that used to make her laugh now landed like insults. He started questioning her decisions, undermining her authority in meetings, speaking over her when she talked. And when Tiana tried to address it, James would smile and tell her she was being sensitive, that she was stressed, that she was imagining things. But Tiana wasn't imagining anything. She was watching, and what she saw terrified her. Tiana didn't confront James. She didn't demand answers or explanations. She watched. She started noticing patterns she had ignored before. The late nights that didn't align with his work schedule. The phone calls he took in the other room. The way he smiled at his screen when he thought she wasn't looking. She started checking, not obsessively, not frantically, methodically. She reviewed the company documents she had signed, read every clause, every footnote, and what she found made her stomach turn. The transfer wasn't temporary, it was permanent. James hadn't just added his name to the business, he had removed hers. Tiana sat in her home office staring at the paperwork, her hands trembling. She had trusted him, and he had stolen from her. But Tiana didn't panic, she planned. She started with the small things, the things James wouldn't notice. She opened a separate bank account, one he didn't know about. She transferred a small amount each week, not enough to raise alarms, just enough to build a safety net. She made copies of every important document, marriage certificate, tax returns, business contracts, insurance policies. She stored them in a safe deposit box James had never seen. She changed her passwords, all of them. Email, bank accounts, cloud storage. She did it slowly, carefully, so that if James was paying attention, and she suspected he wasn't, he wouldn't see the shift. Then she contacted a lawyer. Not someone in their social circle, not someone James would ever encounter at a business event. Someone discreet. Someone recommended by a colleague Tiana trusted implicitly. Her name was Octavia Pryor. Mid-50s, sharp, no nonsense. They met at a coffee shop across town. Octavia didn't waste time with pleasantries. Tell me everything, she said. So Tiana did. She told her about the company, about the documents she'd signed, about the way James had changed after she signed them. Octavia listened without interrupting. When Tiana finished, Octavia leaned back in her chair and studied her. "Do you want to stay in this marriage?" she asked. Tiana hesitated. The question felt heavier than it should have. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Then let me ask you a different question," Octavia said. "Do you feel safe?" Tiana opened her mouth to say yes, but the word wouldn't come, because the truth was she didn't. Not anymore. "No," Tiana said finally. Octavia nodded. "Then we protect you first, the marriage second." Over the next 2 weeks, Octavia worked quietly. She reviewed the documents Tiana had signed, found the loopholes, the clauses that could be challenged, the signatures that had been rushed. She built a case, and when she was done, she called Tiana into her office and laid out a plan. "We can reverse this," Octavia said, "but it's going to take time, and you can't let him know what we're doing." "How long?" Tiana asked. "A few months, maybe less if we move quickly." Tiana nodded. "What do I need to do?" "Act normal," Octavia said. "Don't confront him. Don't accuse him. Don't give him any reason to think you're preparing to leave." Tiana's chest tightened. "You think I should leave?" "I think you should be ready to," Octavia said. "Whether you do or not is up to you. But right now, you don't have the option. He has control. We need to take it back." Tiana left that meeting with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't trapped. She was preparing. But preparation required information. And that's when Tiana hired the private investigator. His name was Terrence Gill, former police detective, retired early, now worked private cases for people who needed answers without noise. Tiana met him in a parking garage downtown. "I need to know where my husband goes," she said, "who he sees, what he's doing when he's not with me." Terrence didn't ask why. He just nodded. "Give me 2 weeks." It took less than that. 5 days later, Terrence called. "You need to see this," he said. They met at the same parking garage. Terrence handed her a folder. Inside were photographs. James and a woman Tiana didn't recognize, sitting at a park, holding hands, laughing. James and 2 children, a teenage girl and a young boy, playing basketball. James walking into an apartment building with the same woman, staying for hours. Tiana stared at the photos, her hands steady even as her chest caved in. "Who is she?" Tiana asked. "Kiera Denham," Terrence said. "They've been together for years. The kids are hers. He's been paying her rent, sending money every month." Tiana closed the folder. "Thank you," she said quietly. Terrence studied her. "You okay?" "No," Tiana said, "but I will be." She drove home in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just drove. And when she got home, James was sitting on the couch, watching television. He looked up when she walked in. "Hey, babe," he said. "How was your day?" Tiana smiled. "Fine," she said. "Yours?" "Same old," James said, turning back to the screen. Tiana set her purse down, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed, the folder from Terrence still in her hands. And for the first time in months, Tiana felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Anger. Not sadness, not grief. Rage. Cold, controlled, focused. James had stolen from her, lied to her, betrayed her, and he thought she didn't know. But Tiana knew everything, and she was done being silent. Tiana's 40th birthday party was James's idea. He had insisted on it, pushed for it, wanted it big and public. At the time, Tiana thought it was sweet. Now she understood. He wanted witnesses. James had been unusually attentive in the weeks leading up to the party, asking about the guest list, offering to handle decorations, acting like the husband he used to be. But Tiana saw through it now. She knew what he was planning. She didn't know the details, but she knew enough, and she was ready. The night of the party, Tiana dressed carefully, a deep red dress that fit her perfectly, hair pulled back, makeup elegant but understated. She looked powerful, because she was. The house filled quickly. Friends, family, coworkers, people who loved her, people who had watched her build something from nothing. James moved through the crowd with confidence. Too much confidence. He was waiting for something, and Tiana knew it. Around 8 o'clock, James excused himself. "I'll be right back," he said, kissing Tiana's cheek. She watched him leave, and 10 minutes later, he returned. But he wasn't alone. A woman walked in behind him, young, confident, beautiful, and beside her, 2 children. The room went quiet. James smiled, and Tiana knew the moment had arrived. James stood in the center of the living room, one hand on Kiara's shoulder, the other gesturing toward the children. "Everyone," he said, his voice loud and clear. "I want you to meet someone." The room was silent. Tiana stood near the fireplace, her hands folded calmly in front of her, her face unreadable. James continued. "This is Kiara, and these are my children, my daughter, Zaria, my son, Rashawn." Gasps rippled through the room. Tiana's mother stood up, her face stricken. "James, what are you—" "I'm being honest," James interrupted. "For the first time in years, I'm being honest." He turned to look at Tiana. "I've been living a lie," he said, pretending, trying to make something work that was never going to work. His voice softened, but the cruelty underneath was unmistakable. "Tiana is a brilliant woman, a successful woman, but she couldn't give me the one thing I needed, a family." The room felt like it was holding its breath. Tiana's sister, Rianne, stood up, her voice shaking with fury. "You need to leave, right now." But James held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said. Rianne looked at Tiana, waiting for her to say something, anything, but Tiana just stood there, watching. James turned back to the room. "I stayed because I loved her," he said, "because I believed we could make it work. I supported her business. I stood by her through every challenge. I was patient when the doctors said children might not happen." He paused, his voice dropping. "But a man needs legacy. A man needs to see himself in the next generation, and Tiana couldn't give me that." The words landed like stones. Tiana's mother's eyes filled with tears. Her father clenched his fists. Her friends looked at her with a mixture of pity and rage. And James stood there, basking in the attention, in the power he thought he had. He gestured toward Kiara and the children again. "This is my family," he said. "This is my legacy, and I'm not hiding it anymore." Kiara stepped forward, her hand resting on Zaria's shoulder. "I know this is hard to hear," Kiara said, her voice gentle, practiced. "But James and I have been together for a long time. These children deserve to know their father, and James deserves to live his truth." Zaria looked uncomfortable, confused, like she didn't fully understand why she was standing in a stranger's living room. Rashawn, younger and more trusting, smiled up at James like he was a hero, and James smiled back. He thought he had won. He thought Tiana would crumble, that she would cry, that she would beg him not to leave. He had imagined this moment for weeks, rehearsed it in his mind, played out every possible reaction. But the one thing he hadn't prepared for was silence. Tiana didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. And for the first time that night, James felt a flicker of unease. "Tiana," he said, his voice softer now, almost uncertain. "Say something." Tiana tilted her head slightly, then she smiled. It wasn't a sad smile. It wasn't a broken smile. It was calm, steady, knowing. She reached into her purse, pulled out a white envelope, and walked across the room to James. She handed it to him without saying a word. James frowned. "What is this?" "Open it," Tiana said quietly. James tore the envelope open, his hands suddenly unsteady. His eyes scanned the first page, and his face went pale. The room watched as his confidence drained away. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked up at Tiana, his eyes wide. "This can't be." "It is," Tiana said. James's hands tightened on the paper, crinkling the edges. Kiara stepped closer. "What is it?" But James didn't answer. He just stared at Tiana like he was seeing her for the first time. James stared at the document in his hands. Legal letterhead, official stamps, words that didn't make sense at first. Then they did. Transfer of business ownership, reversed. Assets, secured. Accounts, frozen. James looked up at Tiana, his face a mixture of confusion and rising panic. "What is this?" "Exactly what it looks like," Tiana said calmly. "You can't," James started. "I already did." His hands tightened on the paper. "You signed the company over to me." "I signed documents you manipulated me into signing," Tiana said. "Documents my lawyer reviewed and reversed." James's jaw clenched. "This is illegal." "No," Tiana said. "What you did was illegal. Fraud, coercion, financial abuse." The room was silent. James turned to Kiara as if she could help him, but Kiara was staring at Tiana with something close to fear. Tiana took a step closer to James. "You tried to take everything from me," she said quietly. "You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I was too soft, too trusting, too broken." She paused. "You were wrong." James's hands were shaking now, but Tiana wasn't done. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a second envelope. James's eyes widened. "What?" "Open it," Tiana said. James didn't move, so Tiana opened it herself. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and held it up for him to see. Medical records. James's medical records, from years ago. The diagnosis he had forgotten, the truth he had never faced. Tiana's voice was steady, clear. "You're impotent, James. You have been for years." The room gasped. James's face went white. "Which means," Tiana continued, her eyes shifting to the children standing beside Kiara, "those children aren't yours." The silence that followed was heavier than anything Tiana had ever felt. James stood frozen, the medical records still in Tiana's hand, his mind racing to catch up with what she had just said. "That's not," he started. "It's true," Tiana said. "The records don't lie." James turned to Kiara, his eyes desperate. Tell her she's wrong." But Kiara didn't speak. She just stood there, her face pale, her hands gripping Zaria's shoulders. "Kiara," James said again, his voice breaking, "tell them." Kiara's lips parted, but no words came out. And in that silence, James understood. She had known. She had always known. "You knew," James whispered. Kiara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. "You knew," James said again, louder this time. "You knew they weren't mine." "James," Kiara started. "You lied to me," James said, his voice rising. "For 15 years you lied to me." "I didn't." "You used me," James said, his voice shaking with rage and grief. "You used me for money, for security. You made me believe I was their father." Kiara's composure cracked. "I did what I had to do," she said, her voice sharp now, defensive. "What you had to do?" James repeated, incredulous. "You built your entire life on a lie." "You built yours on one too," Kiara shot back. "You had a whole wife at home while you played house with me. Don't act like you're innocent." The room erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Tiana's family demanding that James leave. James yelling at Kiara, Kiara trying to defend herself. But through it all, Zarya stood frozen. The 14-year-old girl who had been dragged into this mess without warning, who had been told she was meeting her father's wife, who had believed until this moment that James was her father. She looked up at her mother, her eyes filling with tears. "Mom," she said quietly, "is it true?" Kiara's face crumpled. "Baby, is he my dad or not?" Zarya asked, her voice breaking. Kiara didn't answer, and that silence was answer enough. Zarya pulled away from her mother's grip and walked toward the door. Rashawn, confused and scared, followed her. Kiara turned to go after them, but Tiana's sister stepped in front of her. "You've done enough," Rianne said coldly. Kiara's face twisted with anger and shame. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Rianne said. "You're a liar, and you use those kids as weapons." Kiara opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. James was still standing in the center of the room, staring at nothing. His entire world had collapsed in the span of 5 minutes. The children he thought were his weren't. The woman he thought loved him had been using him, and the wife he thought he could humiliate had just destroyed him in front of everyone. Tiana walked over to him slowly. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. She looked free. "I want you out of my house," she said quietly. "Both of you." James looked at her, his face broken. "Tiana, Now," she said. James opened his mouth to argue, but Tiana's father stepped forward, his arms crossed. "You heard her," he said. "Get out." James looked around the room one last time, at the faces staring at him with disgust, at the children who weren't his, at the woman who had lied to him for 15 years, and then he looked at Tiana. She didn't look away. And in that moment, James realized something he should have known all along. He had never deserved her. James turned and walked toward the door. Kiara followed, her head down, her hands shaking, and when the door closed behind them, the room stayed silent for a long moment. Then Tiana's mother walked over and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Tiana closed her eyes and let herself be held, and for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. 2 years later, Tiana sat on a beach in Bali, watching the sun set over the ocean. Her company was thriving, bigger than it had ever been. Her name was back on every document, every contract, every success. She had rebuilt, but more importantly, she had healed. The divorce had been quick. James had nothing to fight with, no leverage, no claim. He had tried to apologize, tried to explain, tried to win her back, but Tiana had blocked his number and moved on. She had spent the first year after the divorce focusing on herself, therapy, travel, reconnecting with the parts of herself she had lost in the marriage. And then, on a solo trip to Bali, she met him. His name was Omari. He was an architect, calm, kind, present in a way James had never been. They talked for hours on that first night, about life, about loss, about starting over. And for the first time in years, Tiana felt seen. They kept in touch after she left Bali. Video calls, text messages, visits when their schedules allowed. And slowly, carefully, love grew. Not rushed, not desperate, just real. A year later, Tiana found out she was pregnant. She had stopped expecting it, stopped hoping for it, made peace with the idea that motherhood might not be part of her story. But life had other plans, and when the doctor told her she was carrying twins, Tiana cried tears she didn't know she had left. 9 months later, Tiana gave birth to 2 healthy boys. She named them after her father and Omari's grandfather, and when she held them for the first time, skin to skin, their tiny bodies warm against her chest, Tiana finally understood something she had been searching for her whole life. Fulfillment wasn't something you chased, it was something you allowed. And the life she had now, the life she was living with intention and honesty and love, was the life she had always been meant to have. Because what is built on lies collapses, and what waits in truth arrives whole. And that's where Tiana's story ends. Not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with freedom. Because the truth is, the best revenge isn't destruction, it's rebuilding yourself so completely that the person who tried to break you becomes irrelevant. Tiana didn't just survive what James and Kiara did to her, she thrived. She reclaimed her company, she healed her heart, she found real love, and she became the mother she always dreamed of being. Not because she was lucky, because she chose herself. Now, I want to ask you something. If Tiana's story resonated with you, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever had to choose between staying comfortable and choosing yourself, then do me a favor, hit that like button right now, because every like tells me that these stories matter, that they're reaching the women who need to hear them, that becoming her is doing exactly what it's meant to do. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel is built for women who refuse to stay down, women who document instead of react, women who walk away with dignity instead of begging for scraps. Every week, we're bringing you stories that will make you feel seen, validated, and empowered. Stories that remind you that you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, and you're not alone. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and stick with us because we're just getting started. And here's the thing, Tiana's story isn't unique. There are women all over the world right now sitting in the same position she was in, questioning their instincts, ignoring red flags, trusting people who don't deserve it. And if you know someone like that, if you have a friend, a sister, a cousin who needs to hear this story, share this video with them. Don't say why, don't explain, just send it. Because sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is show them that they're not the only one, that other women have walked this path and survived and thrived. Before you go, drop a comment and let me know. What hit you the hardest in Tiana's story? Was it the moment she handed James the envelope? Was it when she discovered the truth about the children? Was it when she finally walked away free? Or was it the ending, when she gave birth to her twins and realized that everything she waited for came when she stopped forcing it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're ready for another story, another woman who chose power over pain, check out the video in the corner right now. Because trust me, you're going to want to hear what happens when a woman books a last-minute flight to surprise her husband on a business trip. And the noise she hears behind his hotel door changes everything. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for choosing yourself. This is Becoming Her, and we'll see you in the next story.